challenging the Catholic Church. That was never his idea. What he wanted to do was set up a small, devout, religious community with people following his way of life, which was living off alms, that's living off money people give you when you're begging, and not owning things, just living and spreading the word of God by preaching outside churches. But his movement was so popular that he ended up with apostles of his own, and he was at this point granted the permission to form an order. In other words, to form a section of the Catholic Church. The Pope had to grant him this basically because he'd got so popular, so many people were listening to what he was saying, listening to this, he was speaking the truth, he was pointing out the corruption that they could see in the church. So people were listening and following him. In fact, there's some stories about mothers who were terrified when St. Francis came to their town that their sons would go up and join him, so they'd have to lock their sons in cupboards. So St. Francis never became a priest. That wasn't what he was into. He wasn't into hierarchies, systems of power and order. He was into just a simple way of life, spreading the word of God. But nevertheless, in 1212, so when St. Francis was 30, he helped establish a second order for women, and they were called the Poor Clares. Clare in Italian is Chiara. And we'll see the Church of St. Clare, the Church of Santa Chiara, once we get to Assisi. So that was another movement, sort of a sister movement, literally, to go with Francis's movement. He also received the stigmata. He went to a mountaintop to contemplate, I suppose, God and spirituality, and the mountain was La Verna, and when he was at the top of this mountain he received the stigmata. That is when an angel strikes your body and shows you that you've been marked by God. So once he received the stigmata, he was recognised very clearly as someone who knew the truth, and so he could be trusted, and it was then that he could really gain the permission of the church. So he was actually, we can see him as a kind of rebel figure, in the same way that some people see Jesus Christ as a kind of rebel figure. He stood up to the way that the Romans were treating the Jews in Nazareth. St. Francis was a rebel. He stood up to the rigid orthodoxy of the church, and he said, this is not right, we need to do things differently. And in fact, because of this kind of revolutionary tendency, we saw that his movement was very unpopular with the wealthy people who were fine with having to pay a lot of money to get out of hell. It wasn't a problem for them. But Francis was unpopular with them because he was preaching to poor people who couldn't buy their way out of hell. So what we're going to see, the big highlight of Assisi, absolutely incredible Basilica of St. Francis, is made up of two parts. Two churches make up one basilica. Basilica is cathedral. So there's the upper church, the upper basilica, and the lower basilica. And in a way you can see it's quite ironic. St. Francis had rejected wealth, and yet here we have the most incredible cathedral complex created for him, for the movement he started. So in a way it's kind of a paradox that his movement ended up producing this basilica.
We'll go for like a minute or two.
So it's the basilica we're going to see with the friar, who is a Franciscan friar. And as I said, so the Franciscans are big into preaching outside churches. So again, it's another irony that this church was produced for the Franciscan movement, because one of the big things they did was they were mendicants. That meant they travelled around the countryside preaching the word of God to anyone who would listen. Like they preached in fields, on the roads. They said that they didn't need a church to preach from. So again, it's strange that there's this incredible cathedral.
And I'm going to get off of this.
So the lower church was built first, started in 1228, so only 2 years after St. Francis died, and donations were pouring in from all over Europe because the fame of Francis had spread throughout Europe and actually to the Middle East as well, and people were sending money. They wanted to build a monument to the teachings of Francis. So the lower church is the earliest, and it's a calm place. It's quite dark because there aren't that many windows, Francis lies. His tomb is in the